Hello and welcome to UCL Global Health. We're very familiar with HIV and AIDS as an issue for doctors and nurses. It's all about drugs and diagnostics and symptoms. But actually 9 out of 10 people who are infected with HIV will get up and go to work. And so this is a workplace issue. Now I'm joined by Dr. Virginia Mantouvalou, who's from our UCL Department of Law, and she's the co-director of our Human Rights Institute. What kind of problems do people who are infected with HIV or have AIDS suffer in the workplace?
I think, yes, HIV is a very important workplace issue. People suffering from HIV face discrimination in the workplace. They are stigmatized exactly because of their HIV status. There is prejudice towards HIV positive people, and this is evident in the workplace because it is a sex-related disease.
Right.
There is prejudice and stigmatization in the workplace, and this is the main problem that they suffer.
So how can the law help to protect people from discrimination and stigma?
The main thing that the law can do is impose obligations on the employer. So because there are certain human rights issues there about access to work, unfair dismissal, the protection of dignity in the workplace more generally, the law can impose an obligation on the employer, for instance, to not test people for HIV when they apply for a job.
Is that actually asked for in many professions?
It does happen, yes. They are tested. There are medical tests when you apply for certain jobs, and HIV tests as well.
And you don't get the job if you're tested positive?
It may be.
Right.
It depends on the job, and it depends on the employer. Other things that the law can require is, for instance, that if there is prejudice in the workplace, if the rest of the workers hear that someone is HIV positive, there may be prejudice. They may say that they don't want to work with this person. The employer,
so people don't observe confidentiality?
There is an issue with confidentiality, yes. So the employer has to observe confidentiality, but it may be that the worker himself or herself says to the others that he or she is HIV positive. Even if there is not an issue of confidentiality, there is prejudice. And so there may be a duty on the part of the employer to educate people in the workplace about, for example, methods of transmission of HIV.
Right.
So if there is prejudice in the workplace and other workers do not want to work with HIV positive people, then the employer should have to educate the rest of the workers. If the worker cannot perform his job because he is ill with AIDS, then the employer may have a duty to accommodate the worker, to try to find an alternative post for him or her so that he or she can still work. So this is another thing, a duty to accommodate, a duty to educate. Protection from unfair dismissal because of HIV status is extremely important as well.
Right.
So the law should not permit dismissal simply because someone is HIV positive.
Just give me an idea. I mean, obviously in Europe and North America, you would expect that the legal systems would be quite protective. But when we're looking in poorer countries with perhaps weaker legal systems, is discrimination and stigma very widespread? Does the law protect?
Mm-hmm. It is very widespread. It is widespread in Europe and the developed world as well, more generally.
Really?
Yes, and even more, of course, in the developing world, countries where there is very, very widespread, where HIV is very widespread, like South Africa, for example. But even in countries in the developed world that you mentioned, in Europe and in the States, there is still there's no sufficient protection for HIV status, I think. So, for example, at EU level, there is no prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of HIV status. In the European Convention on Human Rights, it's not explicitly protected, and we don't know yet how the European Court of Human Rights would deal with this in the workplace.
So are there any interesting legal developments that are happening that give you cause for optimism?
Yes, definitely. There is a new recommendation of the International Labour Organization that is, it involves HIV in the workplace. And this was adopted in 2010, so it's very recent. A recommendation is not a legally binding instrument, so you cannot go to a court, to an international court based on this recommendation. But it is very important symbolically that the ILO, the International Labour Organization, is focusing on HIV in the workplace. It recognizes the problem of prejudice, stigma, and discrimination in the workplace. And it has developed a long list of obligations that state authorities have, in order to protect HIV-positive people. So this is a very significant development in the context of the International Labour Organization.
So lawyers are good for your health?
Yeah, of course. Perhaps the most significant legal development is a judgment of the South African Constitutional Court. In a country like South Africa, this is very significant, where there are huge numbers of people suffering, who are HIV positive. In 2000, I think, there was someone who applied, the case is called Hoffman versus South African Airways. And he applied for a job with South African Airways as a steward. He would be a flight attendant. And he was tested, they did medical tests, and they found out that he was HIV positive. And they refused to offer a job to him. The South African Constitution protects against discrimination, among other issues. And so he took his case to the South African Constitutional Court, and the court, in a very significant, very important judgment, a very important development, said that this is contrary to the Constitution, that the fact that there is so much prejudice against HIV-positive people, it is very widespread in South Africa.
So did he get the job? Was he reinstated?
He was reinstated. The court said that you cannot condemn someone who's already HIV positive, to economic death by depriving him of the opportunity to access a job. So I think this is an example why lawyers can be good for your health.
Good for your health.
Yes.
Virginia, thank you very much.
Thanks.